Come in. Hi, how are you? I've got my nose in this book, which I will actually have to do. I give it its own space at some point. Macrohistory and Macrohistorians, edited by Johan Galtung and Sahel Inayatullah. I've got my nose in it because of this image here, this one here, which gives us a sense of the patterning that the incredible thinker, macro historian, social activist as well, Riane Eisler, has given us in her partnership dominator model. And it really does, it captures that beautifully. But I was also looking at, because of the pattern of it, the pattern of expectation, which was the title of the previous book in this series of sort of reflections on books that really have shaped, I think, aspects of our future's awareness and the way we approach the future. So yeah, it's a great book, and we'll come back to this one. But it's this book here that I really want to talk about, The Chalice and the Blade. That one there, that came out in 1988. And I can remember, because I'm that old, I can remember it being on the book stands in many stores, alternative stores, but also stores of quite I guess conventional reputable stores, because it was a bestseller. Quite an extraordinary book, and it's a mixture of history and futures thinking, a bit like the I.F. Clarke book on the patterns of expectation. And it's one of those ones where you say, okay, where do I start? So if we go to the first part of it, essentially Eisler is giving us a map, a historical map of the Paleolithic, Neolithic transitions that we went through. And she argues, and she builds a strong archaeological argument for this, that that cultural transformation occurs. She calls it cultural transformation theory, and that there was a long period of peace and prosperity when our social, technological and cultural evolution moved upward many thousands of years, when all the basic technologies on which our civilization is built were developed in societies that were not male-dominated, violent and hierarchic. Now, she wants us to get away, though, from this concept of male versus female, which she thinks is a false binary. So she walks us through a whole bunch of different cultures. She takes us to Crete, and she takes us to the emergence of hierarchical cultures and societies, basically urban societies with an urban elite that was patriarchal, was male-dominated, violent, and so on, and was represented by the blade in the title, The Chalice and the Blade. The chalice, of course, is the feminine. So where do we get to? Well, then we get to her sort of social theorizing about where are we going. So she says, look, as that pattern image from the macro history book suggests, that we swing between two kinds of social ordering. One is the dominator social ordering that we are familiar with. That's where there's usually a male, but if not, a hierarchic figure at the top. It could be Queen Elizabeth, who calls the shots. We're seeing an ultra male dominator period at the moment. We're witnessing it globally with Trump, with Putin, with Netanyahu, and a whole bunch of others like that. That dominator model is built on a model of control, violence, intimidation, and so on. And it speaks to a kind of social order that is basically premised on the me society, individualism of a certain kind, hyper-individualism, consumerism, and a fear of the other. The other kind, of course, is what she's talking about, a Galenic culture, which is the partnership culture. And she gives, I've got quite a few points here, but maybe I should move across the historical to some of her other thoughts. she's writing in this came out in 1988, but she could be writing right now. Listen to this, for instance. Most instructive and sobering is that the, inverted commas, cradle of modern democracy, the same United States administration that holds itself above the law, carries out covert wars, slashes public welfare spending to fund the highest military budget in American history, also opposes the constitutional amendment that would grant women legal equality, backing instead an amendment to deprive women of reproductive freedom of choice. I'm going, oh my God. Deja vu, Groundhog Day, all of that sort of thing. So there is a sense that this struggle of how do we order ourselves, make sense of the world, make our world feel hospitable, for instance, is an ongoing one. And it really, for me, and this is what a lot of futures work is about, it's about consciousness. It's about the struggles to become conscious as a species of what we are capable of, despite all that, the violence and so on that we see around us. So she has the following to say. An important lesson to be learned from the rise of modern totalitarianism is that it can be a fatal error to underestimate the power of myth. The human psyche seems to have a built-in need for a system of stories and symbols that reveal to us the order of the universe and tell us what our place within it is. It is a hunger for meaning and purpose seemingly beyond the power of any rationalistic or logical system to provide. So this power of myth is the power of alternative stories to undermine the dominant. Of course, and I think this is quite clear in the way, let's say, Trump is doing so well today, or not doing so well, it depends on who you ask, is that he actually fulfills the mythic order of the father figure, just like Hitler did, for instance, and many patriarchal leaders before him. So where do we go? So we're looking for a myth that orders and provides us with something that we can aspire to, something that we can strive for. So here she is a little bit later talking about a breakthrough in evolution. So her focus is evolution. And this ultimately leads her to education, which is where she spent much of her time since writing this book, actually. But, you know, she talks about the work of Willis Harman, who was at the Stanford Research Institute, and had the following to say: metamorphosis is the basic cultural premise, and all aspects of social roles and institutions, are what drives this thing. So we are in a ferment, constantly in a ferment. He describes, Harman again, this is a new consciousness in which competition will be balanced with cooperation and individualism will be balanced with love. So this question of love, I think, is so interesting because it comes up again and again. And, you know, the sense that love itself, well, easily to sort of just push aside and say it's, you know, all new agey, soft goo-goo, and doesn't actually achieve anything. But when we love beyond our small selves, in other words, we love the world around us, we trust. Love involves trust, but it also involves responsibility. So it means that we feel responsible for future generations. Can we love outside our own generational field, the 200-year present that Elise Boulding speaks to, or beyond that? So how do we achieve this? Where do we go in order to transform? She says the following: to move to a new world of psychological and social rebirth will entail changes we cannot yet predict or even envision. Indeed, because of so many failures following earlier hopes for social betterment, we've got failures abundant now, haven't we? Projections of a positive future elicit skepticism. Yet we know that changes in structures are also changes in function. Just as one cannot sit in the corner of a round room, because Round rooms don't have corners. As we shift from a dominated to a partnership society, our old ways of thinking, feeling, and acting will gradually be transformed. For millennia of recorded history, the human spirit has been imprisoned in the fetters of androcracy. That's what she calls patriarchy. Our minds have been stunted and our hearts have been numbed. And yet our striving for truth, beauty, and justice has never been extinguished. That's why we do Futures now. As we break out of these fetters, as our minds, hearts, and hands are freed, so also will be our creative imagination. That comes up again and again, this question of imagination. And actually, I'm going to jump to that a little bit. I was going to skip over it to go to this point, but hang on for a second. The pattern of expectation, I.F. Clarke, he's tracing the emergence of utopian literature and dystopian literature over a number of centuries, right? Well, here she's brings in a new concept that sort of plays with the utopian concept. She says, so talking about two books, Breaking Free and Emergence, which, are from the 1980s, they will explore this transformation in depth. This is what she's planning to do. They will lay out a new blueprint for social actualization. This is her cultural transformation theory, giving it teeth. Not for a utopia, she suggests, which literally means a no place, okay, but for, and this is this great word, I love it, a pragmatopia. That's pragmatic, a realizable scenario for a partnership future. Though a few pages obviously can't even begin to cover that, she's going to talk about it in these coming things. The books that she refers to may not actually have come out with those titles, but one of the books that she brought out early in the 2000s was a book on education, and she's kind of speaking to that here in this kind of last paragraph, where she's referring to education for children and so on. So I'm going to give you this final paragraph here. For above all, the Gailanic, feminine, the partnership world, will be a world where the minds of children, girls and boys, will no longer be fettered, which is what she referred to in that earlier comment that I read. It will be a world where limitation and fear will no longer be systematically taught us through myths about how inevitably evil and perverse humans are. In this world, children will not be taught epics about men who are honoured for being violent, or fairy tales about children who are lost in frightful woods where women are malevolent witches. They will be taught new myths. That's what we're on about, I think, new myths, epics and stories in which children bring out the good. Men are peaceful, and the power of creativity and love, symbolized by the sacred chalice, the holy vessel of life, is the governing principle. I think that's a beautiful image. The power of love as the sacred chalice. For in this Gailanic world, our drive for justice, equality, and freedom, our thirst for knowledge and spiritual illumination, and our yearning for love and beauty will at last be freed. And after the bloody detour of androcratic history, men and women will at last find out what being human can mean. This kind of visionary, anticipatory imagination is ever renewed, generation by generation. And I think it's amazing to hear her writing like that nearly 40 years ago now, coming up, and yet it still holds true. The power of our desire for a better world, even in the face of, what seems like incredibly negative odds at the moment, it's still our superpower, and I think that we need to remember that. So thank you very much. Hope that was get you your interests piqued and whetted, so you can go off and find a copy of The Chalice and the Blade by Riane Eisler. Thank you.